I saw the seraphim one summer's night, weeping in secret, field of endless wheat. I heard their voices through the fading night, strange and yet intolerably sweet.
So, Roger, tell us the extraordinary story, really, behind the writing of I Saw the Seraphim.
Well, I mean, it was almost, sort of 40 years ago now, which is extraordinary to think about that. I did this little book, which is called Fire Sonnets. And I printed it all myself on a treadle press and down the road. And this is, in fact, the only copy that I've got left of those poems. But you can see on the cover of this there's an image, and I'm not sure now which came first, the poem or the picture. But I do remember when I was an undergraduate, just one day reading the parable of opening the Bible, I think, and reading the parable of the tares and the wheat and the tares, and coming across that phrase, "The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are angels." And suddenly this image appeared in my mind. I was quite confused at the time. I didn't know what it meant. I certainly didn't know how to paint. And it was years later that I sort of started doing a sort of painting on the subject. And I started writing a poem on it at roughly the same time, which was all, perhaps a bit later, was always kind of explaining it to myself. And so that's really how the rest of the poems kind of followed from that first one. And as I said, I produced this book, and I as part of an exhibition and so on. But then I didn't really write any more poetry apart from one other little book, which Jack has also done a setting with one of the poems in, for another 40 years. At which point I suddenly started writing poetry again, and I came back to these poems and slightly revisited them and started doing paintings on the same subject. And that was then this was the second book that I did, the Nearer You Stand, which just came out the other year. And so that was a sort of journey. So the poems that Jack has set started 40 years ago and sort of have continued really to the
present. Just to dig into that, because it's kind of fun to ask questions of painters, because most people kind of think, oh, I wonder what's it like being a painter, because there is this solitary quality to the art. But are you finding that as you paint, you are reflecting on the words of poems, or the poems are coming to you and the poems come to you and then come with the pictures? It's an interactive thing. Sometimes it's the words first, sometimes it's the image, or sometimes it's both at the once.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I don't think it's often exactly both at once. It's usually one comes first and then the other. And it's, yeah, well, I mean, it's like with music, you don't really know where it comes from or how it arrives. But for me, it's mostly the pictures come usually as I'm actually with a sort of pencil. So you're
Yes.
actually sort of writing, scribbling, and an image somehow emerges. And the poems are sort of similar. You have a line, and you then have to find out where it takes you, and you sort of follow it like that. So, yeah, it's always a kind of process of discovery.
Just before I come to Jack, just talk about his setting of the music and what he's done with it. I'm just intrigued. My mum has this wonderfully quirky thing where words can have colours, and I gather there's a name for this. I should remember what it is. But
Yeah.
thank you, exactly so. And but sounds can also happen. So I have a friend who has musical sound. Do you have any kind of sense of sound with either of your poems or your pictures? Do they, for you, Roger, bring any kind of sense of sound?
Um, I don't think not in that sort of synesthetic way, but I do quite often find that I'm listening to a particular piece of music while I'm painting a picture, and will, you know, that will sort of come back, and so that happens in that way. But you know, there, yeah, it's
well, it's fascinating here, Jack. I want to come to you really now to find out your kind of interaction with the words, because I've obviously got, I'm on brand. I've got your book already, Rog. That you didn't sign it for me, so that's an oversight. That's an oversight.
Get signed copies from my website, I should say.
Okay, signed web. I do actually have the previous Fire Sonnets edition as well, so I'm proud to have one copy of that. But Jack, you came to these words. Did they create for you sound instantly, or was it what was the kind of process that brought you to what, by the way, I find absolutely wonderful music? It's very reflective.
Thank you. Thank you. I find that when I read a poem that is resonating with me, I quickly get an idea, a musical idea. But then it needs to be developed, and most of the time that first idea will pay out. It will be the idea that I end up working with. Not always, but most of the time. But once I've got that initial idea, there's still a lot of work to do to bring it forward, to make a piece out of it. And so it's not automatic, but there is an initial kind of burst of inspiration that starts to generate the material. And I felt that way about these poems when I first became acquainted with Roger's work, both his paintings and his poems. It was in an American magazine called Image, which is for art. It's subtitled Art, Faith, and Mystery. And I read about him and read about his work. And I was writing a piece for a conference that was taking place in Oxford in 2011. And so I contacted Roger just out of the blue and asked if I could set his Fire Sonnets. And I got a copy of that early version of the book and from him, and then decided it needed to be a cycle eventually, but I was only setting one of the pieces for that conference. I didn't complete the cycle until, I guess, 2021, when I did the other pieces. And then we recorded it first of last year in January of 22.
Now, there's an interesting story there, isn't there? Because for the conference, you had an orchestrated version of it, and then the more recent recording, which we'll hear some of in a moment, that's actually a cappella. Tell us about why and the different feel of those two for you.
Well, the initial idea was to create a choral a cappella work, but the conference had an orchestra playing, and they were presenting a concert. And they wanted to kind of program my piece on the same concert as the concert with the orchestra. And so it seemed like an opportunity to use the orchestra. And I wondered if it might not make an interesting contribution to the text. And so the first time the piece was heard, it was actually in that variant with the orchestra, chamber orchestra. And now with the recording of 2022, we can actually hear it in the way it was originally designed. Which was a cappella. I
suppose actually thinking about that, I mean, what I love so much about Jack's sort of setting of that is there's one of the sort of second or third lines in the poem is that I heard their voices through the fading light, wild, strange, and yet intolerably sweet. And you just, I mean, the a cappella voices which just sort of capture that. Really.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really try to try to let the text create the form of the music. I don't try to impose a form on a text. I try to let the text tell me what the form of the music could be, which is essentially approaching it as a storytelling feature. The music has a storytelling quality to it, a narrative quality when you approach it that way. And that works both for the larger poem in toto, but it also works for the phrases within the poem. And so individual phrases then don't get forced into a particular musical phrase that has to exist prior to the poem, but the poem dictates how long or how short that phrase can be, or what liberties one can take with the music. And it's kind of like Hopkins' sprung rhythm in that respect, in that you have multiple syllables available to each accented beat, that make for interesting poetry and makes for interesting music, in my view.
No, it does. Well, I found it very ethereal. I had the privilege of hearing the first concert too, but I do think there's an ethereal quality, sort of flames of fire in the hair. Roger, we should finish, but I do just want to ask the same question as you, because I think you've got a newer version of the Fire Sonnet, haven't you?
Well, that's right. As I said, I came back to these poems after 40 years, and was able actually in this book to put them together with the painting that I did. So whereas before I just have the wood engravings, I could now have the paintings, and so I did start some of the poems. There are only some of the Fire Sonnets in the new book, but these two I did slightly revisit, and there were just a few lines that I thought I could improve and change, and so the second. I think I'd sent Jack the new version of the first of that poem. I mean, this first piece has two sonnets in it, but they're all linked by a line which ends one sonnet and then begins the next. And the second sonnet I just changed very slightly. So what you hear in the poem is just a few sort of variations on the lines.
Well, I wonder, could you read that for us, and then we can listen to Jack's setting of it.
Certainly. So the first sonnet ends with the line, like beaten gold, their beauty smote the air, and tongues of flame were streaming in their hair. And the second sonnet begins with that same line. And tongues of flame were streaming in their hair, and flames of fire were dancing in the heat, and through the liquid dancing of that air, I saw the seraphim bring in the wheat. Yet some have entertained them unaware, and with unearthly guests sat down to eat, and found that meal became itself a prayer, a trysting place where earth and heaven meet. As in a dream, once Jacob saw a stair with fire-bright angels moving up and down, and dreaming saw the gate of heaven where an endless love stood as that stairway's crown that moves the stars with passionate desire and makes his angels flames of burning fire.
I saw